Find yourself a booth, order up a cold one. This is the Spring Bar.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Spring Bar. Glad to have you here. I am Florida Mike, sitting with my co-host Joe in the OC, and we have a special guest host today, Steve at Bulovas and Bolt Actions. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right, guys. How about you guys?
Present. I'm present. I'm ready to go.
That's about your day.
It's about my day.
Yeah, it's
All
better
things-
than mine. I think I sent you a picture. Did I send you pictures? I have a leaking roof.
You sent me the wall. I got to see your new textured wall.
Yeah, textured is one way to put it. Water bubbles is another. Has not been tarped yet. It leaked again this afternoon, so that's a thing.
And I'm guessing it's rainy season in Florida, so of course you're
Yeah,
swimming.
hurricane season has already begun.
Rainy season. He called it rainy season. It's drizzling outside.
Yeah,
it's 120 mile an hour winds. Oh, it'll blow over. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I don't have FEMA on speed dial or anything. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. But don't you get the remnants of our hurricanes up there though, Steve?
We do occasionally get them, but I'm like 40 miles inland, so the only way that I feel it is if something goes catastrophically wrong, like Sandy, and thankfully that doesn't happen much.
Oh, yeah. See, I'm right in the middle of the state, so if it comes from one side or the other, I'm getting screwed either way.
You guys are talking about rain, right? That's like the water that comes from the sky.
Rain,
winds, it's
tornadoes.
It's a foreign
concept to you guys.
Yeah, I have no idea. We're in the middle of our third year of drought, so I've got no clue. They're finding new dead bodies in all of the local lakes because the water levels have dropped so far, which is a very New Jersey thing, but even still.
Well, yeah, we dump most of our bodies in the Hudson River, and that's cleaned up a lot, so it's getting difficult these days.
See, we got it. Goals. We all have goals.
All right. So, new watch alerts.
New watch alerts. I've got a couple.
You've got some stuff.
I got a couple. So we'll start with my recent returns from Magic Hands Montoya Watch Service Center. We got the Snorkel Deep Sea that had a dial refresh because I found a bunch of those online that I got for a freaking song.
Yeah, so you got the dials, all NOS dials. That's pretty cool. Now you keep calling it a Snorkel Deep Sea, but isn't it called an Oceanographer Deep Sea?
It depends. It says Bulova Automatic 666 on it, and the line book says like 3 different things. So who knows?
Okay.
I don't know.
Hashtag Bulova.
Hashtag.
So real quick, I was watching an interview. What was I watching? Oh, it was part of the Bulova Collector Series.
Yeah.
And I think it was the Richard Calamaris interview, and he came up with the phrase "the history and mystery of Bulova."
That's
I kind of like that.
So true. That is so true, though.
That nails it.
The history and mystery of Bulova.
It's like, what happened?
Yeah, I know. Hashtag Bulova. All right. So moving on.
Moving on. We got the Oceanographer M back, which, having a conversation with my watchmaker, he was speaking to me about it, and he wants to call it now. We're going to be calling it the Space Ghost dial because it looks a little bit more like the backdrop of the Space Ghost title sequence, which Space Ghost Coast to Coast, near and dear to my heart. So I think that may be the new name for that one.
Okay.
And then the actual new watch alert is this titanium case, titanium bracelet, field watch, probably a Miyota movement. It's got Bulova branding on the movement. You can't really tell what's going on with it. Got silver stick hands, no loom, a roulette date wheel.
That's
double signed clasp, no signed crown, and
really, there's no tuning fork on the crown.
No tuning fork on the crown.
Odd.
But it's got so tuning fork on the case back, all titanium, water resistant, 10 atmospheres, quartz.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on with this watch, and nobody else seems to know. And so, like Mike, you found one online that didn't have the quartz on the back and was the same movement. So
It was the exact same everything, but with what appears to be the proper case back. But if you look them up online, they're all coming out of Japan. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a foreign market thing for sure.
well, and also I think that because it's the titanium, and that's Citizen's bread and butter. You know, they're making titanium parts for the space stations. They're making titanium parts for aerospace. I mean, they're really mastering the idea of how titanium works. So I don't doubt that it's a Japanese domestic item.
So, and we've had this conversation about that watch before, but that titanium, it doesn't do it for me. You're
Not your
looking at
thing.
it, you're expecting it to be heavy, you're expecting it to be a steel watch, and you throw it on, and it's like wearing a swatch. I don't know that I can wear a titanium watch all the time like that. It looks cool, don't get me wrong. It's an awesome looking piece, but not the metal.
I feel like it's one of those things where you have to get used to it. I know I've got a few vintage watches that are like 34 or 36 range. Then when I go up to my 42 millimeter Hamilton automatic, it feels like I just strap a dinner plate to me. And then you wear the thing for a few days and it gets back to normal. And I don't have anything titanium, but I imagine that's the kind of thing you reset your expectations, and before long
It's different,
you don't
though.
notice it.
It's different because it doesn't have the same sort of plasticky feel. There's a different feel to it, and it's not even like wearing like a base metal watch or wearing an aluminum case or wearing anything like that. It reacts to heat differently, so there's a totally different wrist presence. It's really, really light, but it still feels metallic. So it's a totally different experience than watches I have that are similar dimensions, similar size on a bracelet. It's cool. It's cool. I like it. I'm going to wear it a lot, but I got to find out what it's supposed to be. There's not even a model designation for it. I'm not sure that the hands are right. I mean, it's a complete unknown. The history and mystery.
Yeah. The history and mystery of Volvo. There you go. So is that it? Is that the end of it?
That's it. That's all I got. It's been a light week.
Okay. So
what do you got?
I have, first off, wearing my new Ghost and Crown fine timepieces, Ghost and Crown Trading Company fine timepieces. JP sent it. It came packaged very nicely. It was wrapped up. It had a little bow tied in some string.
Right? Did you get the card too? Like
I got the card with it. He does very well. I feel very bad because when he opens up the shirt that we send him, it's not going to be anything like that. So, but I told him, I promised him I would wear the shirt for our next show. So that's why I have this one on. But as far as new watches go, I have this one. I don't think we ever really got to discuss it. This is another Jetstar E that I've got. I bought this one because it has the proper crown and it has the proper Bulova clasp. Now, the one that I have already has a Bulova crown and a Bulova clasp, but they are both incorrect. So this one will replace those items. But then I'm left with an extra one that I don't need. So I will end up refinishing this one. I will put a good working movement in here, and I'll end up reselling it. The only problem is I need another dial again.
It's still flaking. It's got that same kind of.
So it's got the same thing as the first dial. It's just that weird flaky.
Yeah.
The paint is peeling, and it just, with what I would like to get for it, I wouldn't feel right doing it with this dial that's in it. So the hunt begins again. We'll see if somebody can come with another $8 listing for a dial would be fantastic, like the last one. Next up, we have something that I have been trying to get for a very, very long time. The Volvo Deep Sea chronograph. This is the result of many a lost auction, a lot of sleepless nights, banging my head against the wall, Joe teasing me with the one that he has.
True.
But found this one, surprisingly won the auction for a cheap price. But I feel the reason is, the bezel is extremely, extremely faded, to the point where it's just essentially an aluminum bezel. But number two, and I always like a watch with a story, but this one has the Valjoux 7733 in it, but it is not a Bulova gold-plated 14 EB. It is the silver Valjoux 7733. However, it has the 14 EB bridge on top. So go figure.
So potentially it's a replacement. Potentially it's been serviced. I mean, it's been serviced at least once. So
I would hope.
There's a plus.
I have to imagine, and I would think probably relatively recently, because this thing runs great, winds smooth, has no problem setting. The chronograph works. When it resets, the hands are slightly off, so I'll have to reset the hands a little bit. But it's spot on. It does not lose more than maybe a couple seconds over its power reserve. I mean, I'm really impressed.
Nice.
Being that it's my first vintage chronograph, I'm super impressed with it. So
ooh, now it starts.
I know. Well,
The
we'll
addiction
see.
kicks up.
Right. Well, we said once I finish a Jetstar collection, what am I going to do next? Maybe this is it. Who knows?
Oh, you're in trouble. You're in
Too
trouble.
bad Joe and Casey got rid of their bezel-less 3100
That's
Ws
right.
because that's the companion to the Deep Sea. That's
It
the one I
is.
had, actually.
It is, and it's a nice.
is it?
That dial, the dial on those is so good. The printing of the tack scale on the outside, I don't think I've ever seen one that was ugly. It just got really well preserved. It was really well done. Those are killer watches. Same movement, same hand wound.
Nice piece. I didn't want to, and I hate to use the word settle because I don't want to say that it's settling for that watch, but I really wanted to have the Deep Sea, so I didn't want to spend the money on something that I was just going to move along anyways. So I held out. I got this one for a song, and I'm happy with it. I need a few parts. So
when I had to get rid of mine, it hurt.
But it went to a good home though.
It did, but it still hurt a little bit. Just
yeah. But see, KC just outright sold his, but now he wants to get a Deep Sea, but he needs the solo dial version because he has this weird aversion to the 666 on a dial. But at least we can all match then.
More for me. I'm okay with that. Steve, what do you got that's new?
I don't actually have anything new at the moment. The last purchase I got was the 4823 8000 that we'll probably be talking about later today. But that was about a month ago at this point. So
are you okay? Are you feeling well, or just
well, I am planning on a new purchase, but I am currently short of money, so we'll probably give it another month or two.
Let's talk about that real quick. Can we let the cat out of the bag, or is it just a few people that know what it is that you're looking at? So go ahead and say if you want what you're looking to buy.
So I am looking to get a modern Grand Seiko, and probably to the surprise of no one who's listening to this, it's going to be a Quartz. I want a 9F.
The 9F, yep, fantastic watches for the price.
So for those of you guys who are obsessed about Seikos and Grand Seikos, I'm looking at a 44 GS case champagne dial freehand. They're 40 millimeter. So SBGV 005, 205, or the current production SBGP 001. I've just got a sucker for these, curved, polished, highly sculpted cases that Seiko really leaned into heavily in the 60s and the 70s, and that's pretty much my favorite of the modern designs. Unlike most of the other Grand Seikos, it's nice and thin, but it still has those gracefully curved and polished sides, and it's just hard to say no.
So what do you think of the new dial release?
I love it. If I had $3,800 to burn, I would have ordered one. But I'm looking more at the used ones, which are like $1,700. So I'm a long way off from the new ones, and they'll be long gone by then. So maybe on the secondary market.
You're the resident Seiko guy this evening, so I'll ask you because you probably know and I don't. Is that new dial, is that a limited, or is that just new in the production line?
It's a limited edition. They're making 2,000, which is a lot for Grand Seiko LEs. But of course, people are going crazy over them, and they're already sold out in most markets. So
it's a gorgeous dial. If you haven't seen pictures of it, because it's not like you're going to be able to get one in the metal, unless you're one of the lucky 2,000, who I don't think would be on our listener list. But
and I wonder why it took them so long to do that. Make a textured dial 9F. It was something that should have happened a while ago, and they would sell like crazy, especially if they made it a normal market piece.
Yeah, I think Seiko just kind of treats the 9Fs as like
I
a
think, somebody escaped.
yeah. That was my wife. The what do you call it? The phone was going off.
No.
I I think Grand Seiko still kind of treats the 9Fs as like base models. The 44 GSs are a little higher price and a little fancier, but they still kind of treat them as entry level. The only way you get a really special dial out of them is for one of those hilariously small production run LEs that they typically only sell in Japan. So
Mhm.
I'm just glad that they went to 4-digit production for once, because that means that maybe in a few years a guy like me can afford one rather
You
than
get one second hand, yeah.
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 Yeah, probably.
I was
What's the
looking at a
market
few
like
other
for
ones.
that?
What was that?
What was the market like for secondhand?
They're typically like anywhere from 50 to 75% of their original cost.
Okay.
Um, if you can get them out of Japan, they're typically cheaper.
Really?
And yeah, well, the
I've heard
Japanese
that too.
the Japanese market is pretty good for used stuff in general because the Japanese don't seem to like used goods and they're very particular about things being perfect. So,
Mhm.
if you're willing to accept the risk of, has it been polished or not, and then possibly have to find spare links for your bracelet because the average, I guess, Japanese consumer is smaller than the average American guy like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can get a pretty good price on it. So, also a lot of those older Grand Seikos never left Japan. So if
Right.
you really want something obscure, then that's the place to find them.
Interesting.
Same thing with the vintage stuff too. This stuff is, you don't find it anywhere else
Mhm.
unless it's at a big premium.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. All
Well,
right.
let's move ourselves on here, and we'll go to some wrist and drink checks. So, Steve, you are our guest. Why don't you go first?
So even though we're talking about quartz tonight, I am actually wearing a automatic, and it's a Bulova.
Look at
Yeah.
that. Yes, I
You
remember this
guys,
one.
you guys should recognize this because
Yes,
you're
we
the ones
do.
who identified it. So this is a 1972 Bulova Jet Clipper E, as you guys identified in the line book. I actually had it identified as a president by the guys at mybulova.com, but they didn't have the original bracelet. So this is pretty cool. It's 11 AO ACB date. It's on the original bracelet, which is a JB Champion with a Bulova signed clasp.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's got that two-tone center link on that
Yes.
bracelet, which is just
Yeah.
killer.
Yeah, it's like
the whole package is awesome on that one.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. This originally belonged to my grandfather.
even better.
Yeah, and he always wore Timexes and other cheap watches, and this was kind of a special occasion piece. So it's got very few scratches and scuffs on it. So it's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and obviously it plays nice with you guys.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. So, and like we've met most people, it's been through the Bulova space, and you're no different with us. I think that Caravelle is really what sparked the real ongoing conversation with us, and really got us to get to know one another. So, Bulova again for the win. But you also bought another one. Now that one has the whale on a dial, and you bought one that doesn't have the whale.
Yeah, I actually should have brought that one down. But so
That's
this
all right.
one,
we'll put a picture up.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see, but this one's got the whale on it. It has no Swiss made on the dial, and it has slightly different minute markers. It also has a slightly different case back marking compared to the other one. The other one that I got was no bracelet, and it's beat mercilessly. Somebody wore it heavily, but I saw it for sale on eBay for a very, very low price, and I figure, I rarely see these. I'm going to buy it. I'll have a set of spare hands, a spare dial, and a spare movement in case something terrible happens to mine. At least I'll have the exact same parts. Put them away. You never know when you need them. And then I got the thing and realized that even though it looks like it's the same watch, it's Swiss made. It has a slightly different dial marking.
It's slightly different. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if that one's a 1973. So I don't know if it's like a year-on-year production variation, or if it was one was made in the U.S. and one was made in Switzerland for different markets.
It's hard to say.
Yeah,
that's a debate that is ongoing, whether or not there were production changes within a run just based upon like what they were hearing back from sales reps, or whether or not it was a European versus a non-European. And then there's a question about serial numbers and how that works. And
yeah.
and nobody knows.
See, And one of the best examples I have of that is my Jetstar F. I have two copies of that right now. The one that's the real nice condition that's in the collection. But then I bought a spare one because I had the rare dial and handset that I wanted to combine the best of the both worlds. But that the case with the rare handset is slightly different in that it has a metal movement holder versus the plastic. So the diameter inside is slightly different. And then when you get into the dial, it has little loom plots at the ends of the markers where the other one didn't. And so there's just a few little differences here and there that make it really a different watch.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Yeah, why?
Well,
Who knows?
I also find interesting that at that point in time, Bulova was making cases and movements in the US and in Switzerland. So even if it was theoretically the same watch, there might have been minor differences just between manufacturers of the actual cases at the time, or dial makers. So
it's fascinating when you look at, okay, here's a company that's split in two, and that's without getting into what was happening with the Citizen Miyota production that was going on into the Carabel stuff, into that whole line, which had your West German stuff too. Yep. I mean, it's just, I need a drink.
Yeah. So are you drinking anything tonight, Steve?
Normally I do something alcoholic, but I'm doing it light tonight. This is actually strawberry iced tea that my wife made this past weekend. She went to the local grocery store and the strawberries were fantastic. So we decided to make iced tea out of it, and it's really good. So here we are.
Joe knows all about strawberries these days.
I do. Local strawberry festival. We cut 4,000 pounds of strawberries for the people.
Did you keep any for yourself?
No. No, I brought them home on my hands. I smelled like strawberries for a week. Worse than having conditioner. Oh, it was bad. What do you got, Mike?
All right, so I'm gonna let Steve go twice because I'm wearing his watch. So this is the watch that really inspired our episode for this evening. So Steve, why don't you tell everybody about this watch?
Yeah. So what Mike is wearing is a Seiko King Quartz 4821 8000, which was a 1976 production quartz, high quality at the time. That model is kind of weird compared to the other ones because it's no date and has a variation on the movement with a longer battery life and a higher level of accuracy. I just found it on eBay one day. I fell in love with the case. I thought the double L for presumably long life, long battery life was an interesting marking, and I bought it. And I've been posting it on and off on Instagram and Reddit and WatchSeek for a while. And Mike commented on it and said, "Hey, that looks pretty cool. I don't know anything about this. I've never looked at them." And that got us talking in the DMs. And I said, "Well, I've got 3 of these things floating around at this point. Do you want to borrow one for a little while?"
It's always good to have spares, but come on, man.
Yeah. Well, I don't have 3 of that model. I've got 3 different Seiko quartzes, and this is the one that Mike has is the other 48 that I have. So I figure,
if we're being honest, it's the one he likes the least.
It is. Yeah.
That's fair.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
Because it's really cool. It has a lot of early Grand Seiko design cues. So is this in fact a 2-piece case? Is that what this is?
Yes. Yeah. The bezel is a separate subassembly. I think that's one where the crystal is actually bonded into the bezel and it comes out as an assembly, and then you press the crystal out of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then there's like a separate case back that I think holds the movement. So it might actually be 3 pieces.
A 3-piece, yeah. So it's very nicely done. I mean, I can tell where it's nicely finished. I mean, it's just the dial looks great. It's a weird a light silver dial, but reflects white in pictures when you have it outdoors. You really have to look at it in a certain light to really tell that it's a silver dial. But the hands are just perfect needle hands. I mean, everything is just great. It's just exactly what you would expect a high-end Seiko to be. So I like it. I enjoy it. I think it's really cool.
It's also from the time when Seiko was really sort of figuring out how all of their lines were working, because you had your Grand Seiko, your King Seiko, a couple others, Lord Marvel, and the way that the lines were breaking out. And was that the competition between the 2 factories, or was that just them being schizophrenic?
So what's interesting is, by this point in the mid 70s, the competition between the factories was more limited to movements rather than the whole watch. If we want to, we can go into it later. But at that point in the 70s, the King Seiko and Grand Seikos were dying, and Seiko was kind of transitioning the whole line into quartz. So earlier in the 70s, they had separate model lines for the quartz models. By the mid 70s, the writing was on the wall. So they decided we're going to replace the Grand Seiko with the Grand Quartz, built to the same standard and quality. And then we're going to do your King Quartz, King Seiko replaced by King Quartz. They actually shared a lot of cases. I don't know if they were identical actually, but the designs were very similar, and just kind of transition the whole line over. But at the time, you could get King and Grand Quartzes that were made by Suwa and Daini, the two Seiko factories at the time. So it wasn't quite as big a delineation as it was in the 60s. But both factories still had completely separate, completely custom engineered movements, even in the quartz years. So there was still a fair bit of internal competition. It just it was in the movements themselves rather than the whole watch.
Interesting.
So
very interesting.
So the 248s, the one that Mike has and the one that I'll have here, and then the 99 that I have here are all Suwas. I don't have any Dainis yet, but at some point I'll grab one, I'm sure.
All right. Well, then, Mike, what's in the glass?
I'm boozeless, so yeah, Steve and I are kind of sharing the same drink. I've got an Arnold Palmer going on in my glass. I know,
man.
I'm sure, like mine, it would be better with some rum in it, but it'll do as is.
I know. It is what it is. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Joe's gonna show us up.
What are you gonna do? I have a different drink, but you guys are forcing me.
Need to make up for our dryness.
God, forcing my hand, like just somebody's got to hold up for the team.
You're gonna have to twist your arm real hard, aren't I?
So,
taking it for the team.
Does that make us the bad influence, or are you the bad influence?
That's a good question.
I don't know, but you're all driving me to drink.
You're welcome.
Mm. Oh, good Lord.
Oh, goodness.
My turn.
What are you wearing?
Lady G.
Lady G.
And I posted this today, and one of the guys that hasn't seen it recently, he started following me recently. It's like, well, that's kind of how what is that? I'm like, oh, there's a story.
You only knew.
There's the spring bar watch.
Steve doesn't, the infamous spring bar watch. Steve doesn't know. There's a very X-rated version of an episode that we recorded talking about the Lady G Shock. Still debating on if we release that one day or not.
The spring bar after dark.
Yeah.
Maybe something you slip out the cracks when you decide to stop doing this years in the future.
Maybe,
yeah.
Maybe it was. I think we ended up recording for 3 hours that day, and normally we try to do about an hour of content. It takes us about an hour and a half. It was 3 hours. It just, and the outtakes have just got to be great. I couldn't even watch through the whole thing. I was laughing too hard. So
I don't think we've ever laughed so much in our lives.
That
was a good one.
So
all right,
I got that.
You got two drinks. What's that one?
Oh, this is some Jim Beam, Black Label. I think it's Black Label. Really nice. I recommend it.
Is it good? I've heard about it.
It's gone.
Okay.
Not a whole lot left. So
that's
what I got.
I thought you said you already had a drink.
I did, but I'm drinking this first.
Well, so what else? Okay, all right.
Then I got fruit punch. Come on.
Oh, okay. Fruit punch. Is that a what do you call them? Not a spritzer. What are those fruity drinks? Yeah, the Trulies.
Yes,
what
it is.
Seltzer.
Yes, it is.
You and your seltzers.
I drink a lot of those.
It matches your Lady G very well.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And and then I'll wash it down with bourbon. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
There's not a problem here. So what are we talking about tonight, Mike?
So on tap today, we are talking, if you guys hadn't read the tagline and you haven't paid attention to our opening conversations, we're talking vintage quartz watches. I know, go ahead, scoff, boo, turn off the no, don't turn off the radio. But really though, vintage quartz watches is completely different than the modern plasticky throwaway pieces that you have today. Really, when you get down to the basics and where they started and how some of these companies manufactured these early quartz movements, they're works of art in their own right. So,
well, to the point too that like even if we look at where we are currently with some of the current quartz productions, that 9F is going to have a display case back. It's a highly finished quartz movement. They're treating it the same way you would treat any mechanical, and it's phenomenal. They're gorgeous to look at.
Yeah, and if we're talking display case backs, the François Paul Journe, the caliber 1210, that has a display case back. That is just an awesome. They call it an electromechanical movement, but it's essentially a quartz watch. But the way that thing works and how it has the little rotor movement detector in it, and
the Bulova curve as well.
Yeah, you know. So I mean, quartz watches, they're, dare I say, cool. I have a few. You know, I don't have anything, you know, real cool, not like, you know, some of these older Seikos like this, but all our quartz watches have a root somewhere. So
it's true. Well, so looking at where it's coming from, you've got the Hamilton electrics, which had all sorts of problems with shorting and fires and whatnot. Move into the tuning fork watches and that whole Accutron space, and then that gets licensed. It gets copied by the Chinese, it gets copied by the Russians as well. But then
I'm sure the Russians didn't license it.
Well, of course not. But I mean, I'm sure that, you know, what's probably worse too is that who is the U2 pilot, Francis Gary Powers, who got shot down, and I'm willing to bet he was wearing an astronaut.
Yeah.
Right. So
well,
there you go.
Reverse engineering at its best.
That's where it came from. So, you know, you've got all that stuff going on. But then you get into this quartz thing. And you've got movements that are getting started in the mid early 60s and they start to make that jump and start to make that development. And it seems that you've got like a couple of different courses that are going on. There's a couple of different Swiss brands that are working independently. There's the Center for Electronic Horologe, the CEH, which is putting together the Beta 21 movement. And then there's Seiko kind of working on their own.
And before we get involved with it, I think it's worth mentioning the Accutron, the tuning fork. Really a pioneering design. Well, not really a pioneering design, but a what do they call it? A revolutionary design in watchmaking since the mechanical watch was born. Really created its own demise, because essentially a quartz watch is named after the quartz crystal that is cut and shaped into a tuning fork shaped crystal. You get power through a battery, goes through circuits, vibrates at very high frequencies, translates into pulses, goes through stepper motors, and you get, you know, the electrical mechanical movement, and it all translates into analog time. But that design wouldn't have really been around. Maybe it would have down the line, but it was generally copied from the vibrating tuning fork. So
I feel like a lot of it was inspired by the Accutron. The Accutron was so big and so popular and so revolutionary that everybody else kind of had to make a response to it. And because Bulova had it all patented, everybody else sat down and said, all right, what else can we do? We can't just copy that.
Now, come on, they licensed. They
did
licensed
eventually.
it. You could buy their export version. It would be fine. Okay.
And well, yeah, and those tuning forks ended up in a lot of high-end watches. Who had them? Omega had them.
Omega
Longines had them.
Zenith.
Zenith had them. Yeah.
Movado.
Had them. I mean,
Titus.
Yeah, a lot of these high-end manufacturers use that tuning fork movement, and a lot of these same manufacturers are using quartz movements too. I mean, let's go through the list real quick. I mean, everybody loves to scoff at quartz movements, but Omega, Hoyer, JLC, Cartier, Rolex, Seiko, Girard-Perregaux, FP Journe. I mean, these are high-end, six-figure, watchmakers that are producing quartz movements. So that says a lot. I get it's a far cry from the cheap plastic ISA pieces you're getting in your fossil watch, but it speaks volumes when you're looking at what they're doing.
Well, but when you're talking about heritage Swiss brands and recognizing that before the quartz crisis there were a hell of a lot more, right? Because what's the number for how many there were prior, and then how many they
prior
dropped by
to
thousands.
The quartz crisis, they estimate there was 1,600 watchmakers, watch companies, in Switzerland. Once everything died down in the late 70s, they were down to 500 or 600.
Right. So the number, it's just drastic shifts. However, that being said, the quartz movement was not cheap when it initially comes out. It's not a novelty movement. You can't get it in a Happy Meal. It was a higher end complication than anything else. And the watches were going for a sincere premium, but it was the cutting edge technology. It was the accuracy was well beyond what mechanical watches could do at the time.
So, okay, Seiko Astron comes out in Christmas Day, 1969.
Right.
If I remember correctly, they are solid gold case pieces, right?
Correct.
So, and I think they say it's because it was such a new technology that they tried to figure out a way to sell it to the public and that they would be interested in it. So they just dipped it in gold and away we go. And it did well for them. It
did. It busted open the door.
They did good. Although
that's a complete opposite though from like the Beta 21, which was there's like 20 plus groups of Swiss watchmakers that are involved in the CEH, Bulova being one of them, which I just found fascinating. Mm-hmm. And they developed the Beta 21 movement after the Beta 1 and the Beta 2 movements, both of which do Neuchâtel observatory trials in like 67, I think. And both of those, they meet chronometer certification, but they scrap both of them and combine some of the aspects of both to try to make the Beta 21. Beta 21 comes out. Patek has got their ellipses and some of the other pieces that they do with that same sort of casework. Rolex has got it. Omega, blah 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 blah, and they only move 6,000 units between the 20 companies. So all things considered, the Beta 21, which is not the first quartz movement, that definitely goes to the Astron. It's kind of a flop.
The Astron was the first quartz released. Now
right.
The Beta 21 was available, or it was completed in 69, but wasn't released until 70.
Correct.
Why, if they were racing one another, why they wouldn't have released it the same year that it was done, I don't know. But
what you have to keep in mind is a lot of these early quartz movements were as much science projects as they were viable commercial products. So if you look at the earliest quartz movements that were announced and produced initially in like 69, 70, a lot of them didn't actually make it to market. The Astron did. Seiko made maybe 1,000 or so, 2,000. They were all more or less handmade. The Beta 21s, more or less the same thing. But there was a 36 series movement that Seiko made. That was made by the Daini factory. 35 was a Suwa. Seiko made 1,000 of them, prototyped them, and then trashed them all. They never made it to market. Around the same time in 69, even before the Astron was released, Longines announced their own, what do they call it? Ultra quartz.
Yeah.
It works a little bit differently than the Beta 21 and the Astron.
Yeah, because they weren't part of that CEH consortium.
And they didn't make it to market until 71 or 72. They had so much trouble commercializing it. Omega was working on their own quartz movements, and they didn't hit the market until 72 or 73. So you're looking,
which is also strange because Omega had licensed the tuning fork technology.
Yes. Well, the funny thing is, those Omega tuning forks didn't hit the market until the same time.
Right.
I think at this point the technology was moving so quickly, and there was so much competition to be the latest and greatest that everybody was kind of reaching for everything, grabbing every bit of technology that they could to try to figure out exactly what the future was. And
also it's kind of interesting to look at that when you look at it from a timing standpoint, because you think like, 70s, why the 70s, like, all right, when was the moon landing? And you want to start thinking about how that competition was really gearing up, and then what the results of that were and the things that people were seeing. And this is coming directly out of the results of the space program, and that innovation was coming just fast and furious across all aspects of any kind of production. So, translating it into watches is not that far fetched. And it seems that was a period of just exponential growth in the watch industry.
And another thing that we haven't mentioned yet is LEDs. The Hamilton Pulsar came out in 70 or 71.
Right.
That's quartz as well, but that has a completely different way of showing the time. So you think in a 3-4 year period, the whole industry was turned upside down, not only by the technology in general, but trying to figure out the best way to do it. So,
but
see, the LED thing though, and we delved into that a little bit, but we don't talk about it much. The LED part, those watches, and everybody, there's all these reissues of them that are going on currently. As it's a heritage piece, it is a vintage, okay, it's all of those things, but they kind of suck. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say it out loud. They kind of suck because you've got this huge drain on the battery life, and even if they're going with like an LCD now rather than the LED or whatever, however you want to make it, it still doesn't change the fact that if you're going off of the vintage design, I've got to touch the watch, read the display, not get dazzled by the glowing thing, and remember what time it was. And then it goes away because it's a drain. The early Computrons had 2 batteries. They had 2 battery hatches because they were draining power that fast. And that was an issue with a lot of the early watches that you couldn't try to find. You were looking at cell life of a year, and that was.
But it was the latest and greatest thing. So again, you're talking about moon landings and things. Well, look at the computers that they were using for the rocket launches. I mean, they were taking up office-sized rooms, and here you could wear a computer on your wrist.
True. No, I'm not knocking it. But it's just hard to, it's hard to put yourself back into that time frame and into that mentality and to realize what was going on, and just trying to, putting it into perspective for what it was. It was the newest and flashiest thing, but even with that, like, it still wasn't that good. But the early quartz, the Seiko stuff, the early, some of the early pseudo mechanical quartz, the jeweled movements, those ones are still repairable. You can fix them. It's not, you don't trash it. And when you start looking at, particularly because we're all into Bulova to a great extent, when you look at what happened in the mid 70s when the tuning fork movements were going in for service, they were being completely scrapped. They weren't even trying to repair them, particularly as you get into the early 80s, and they were replacing them with quartz movements.
So you have them with quartzes.
Right. And you can get, it is a Bulova service, single owner, Accutron, supposed to be a tuning fork movement that has a Bulova quartz movement factory installed in it. And like they would do things because the movement symmetry didn't quite work out. You're looking at factory cutting of the dial.
I was just going to say, they look like hack jobs.
Yeah.
Well, they were hack jobs, but they were hacked at the factory. Like you paid a premium to have it hacked like that. And, and I've got a couple, and it's like, oh man, if I can try to get that dial, but good luck.
So here's the thing: you're talking about these early quartz movements could be serviced, and they weren't throwaway pieces. There was passion that was put into these movements. I mean, you had watchmakers hand making the parts that went inside these movements. It's not like it was or like it is today, where everything is just mass produced, and you have robots that are cutting out little plastic gears. They were putting just as much time and effort and heart and soul into these quartz pieces as they would their mechanical counterparts. And FP Journe with the caliber 1210, they're still doing it the same way. If you read about it, they still have watchmakers that are hand making the individual pieces to go in there. The electronic components are Swiss made, so they're not being sourced from Asian countries. They're just genuine works of art.
Yeah. No, without question. Yeah. So let's talk specifics. what models, if we're looking at early quartz, and Steve, early quartz, we're really talking about Seiko, honestly.
So Seiko was the biggest player. They were the leader in the industry. They made the most changes, from year on year in the 70s. They made all sorts of amazing things, but they were not the only people innovating in that space at the time. One of the most important evolutions in quartz movements in that time was Gerard Perregaux. They came out with the GP350 in, I think, 1972. They were the first quartz movement to have the 32 kilohertz crystal vibration that just about all modern quartz movements use.
32, I have it written down here. It's
32 and a bunch of numbers.
768 hertz.
Yeah.
So, okay, talk to me a second about the crystals at that time, because initially, right, it was a single slab.
Yep.
And then you have to deal with thermal compensation. You have to do it, and when they started going into the making the two prongs, making the tuning fork, so you can get that vibration, get it better. How were they cutting the crystals? Were they growing the crystals? Because I know they're grown now, and then you get into Bulova with the precisionist, and they've got like a triple.
Yeah.
So
I'm honestly not sure how they made it at the time, but I think they learned very quickly that the tuning fork is the way to go. The biggest changes in that era, in my mind, was the frequency of vibration, and then that as a function of power consumption. Because the first quartzes were like in the 8,000 range.
I was just going to say some of the early ones were 8 and 18,000.
Yeah. So 8,000 was your first Astrons, and I think possibly the Beta 21s as well. And that was done for power consumption, because these earliest quartz, some of them like the Longines Ultra Quartz and the 36 series Seikos that never made it to market, had like real complex actual electronic components doing the calculations to get the quartz vibration going.
Mm-hmm.
But when you got into integrated circuit boards, that's when you were able to up the vibration, up the frequency, and then up the accuracy. Because the integrated circuits, the first, I believe Gerard Perregaux used a Motorola circuit, and then Seiko used one by another company whose name escapes me in the US. It's called CMOS circuitry. I don't know the exact physics behind it, but basically when you are switching the transistors, that's the only time that you're using power. Earlier systems required you to apply power to both sides of the circuit all the time. So you burn through the battery very quickly. With the CMOS systems that were used on the early Seikos and the Beta 21, you had much lower power consumption. So year after year, these processors got more efficient and more powerful. So you could up the frequency and get better accuracy without killing your battery life. So you started at the 8,000 range, you doubled it into the 16,000 range, and then GP with the GP350 came out with a 32,000 range. And that's basically the standard that most quartz watches use today. It's accurate enough. It's a good balance of power consumption. And that's basically what everybody settled on. So let's see. So you've got the GP350, you've got the 35 and 36 series Seikos. You've got the one interesting side diversion was the Omega Mega Quartz. They did a 1310, that was a 32,000 hertz or 32K hertz movement. And then there was the 2.4 megahertz Mega Quartz, which you've seen some of the marine chronometer quartzes.
Yeah, right. Those suckers.
They're like giant bricks.
Yeah, but they're so cool.
They are so cool.
And they're so cool.
They're ridiculously accurate because instead of 32,000 vibrations per second, they did 2.4 million. So everybody was chasing accuracy. That's basically what the entire purpose of quartz movements were. But different companies went after it in different ways. And Omega
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just had some whiskey delivered.
Nice.
I didn't want to be left out. Okay,
cheers.
Continue.
So different companies applied different approaches to improving accuracy, and Omega decided to shoot for the moon and go for a really high frequency. Obviously, it burned through battery life, but when you have that high level of vibration, the accuracy was incredible.
Omega shot for the moon.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
We do the jokes here, Steve.
Should have warned me in advance. So, this is early 70s. Everybody's experimenting. Everybody's trying to figure out what the best way to do a quartz is. You're looking at basically the like a format war, just like when you do with everything else with technology. But before long, things kind of settled out. Different companies figured out the frequency, initial attempts at thermal compensation,
Right.
usually through temperature adjustment, testing the movements at different temperature and adjusting accordingly. And then refining the actual construction of the movements. If you look at a 38 series Seiko, which is the first really mass-produced Seiko quartz movement in the 70s, and then you compare it to the 48s, which were the next generation a year or two later. The 48s are simpler, more efficient, slightly fewer bells and whistles, but generally a better design. They're cheaper, yes, but they're also more compact and more efficient, because each year these companies were iterating, improving what they're doing, figuring out what was wrong and improving it. And Seiko was really the best at it, in my opinion, in the 70s, because they were rapidly changing, learning new things, coming out with new movements and moving on.
I don't think you can make an argument that Seiko changes the game. Citizen gets in there as well, and Citizen does very well in the electronic space. But like most of the Japanese, the Swiss were lagging real far behind until you get into the 80s with Swatch.
Yeah.
And it took them a long time to kind of get ahead of that curve, or even get onto the curve at all. And I've it's always been interesting, because it seems that it has only been in, say, the last 15 years, 10 years, that the Japanese companies are getting their due in terms of respect for how the companies have managed things. And also, the thing that I find really fascinating is that the conversation never turns to Citizen. It's always a conversation about Seiko, and I think it's because they just got better marketing.
Oh,
but
yeah.
everybody knows the Miyota movement.
Well,
So
the amazing thing is Citizen was doing impressive work with early quartz as well. They have an early quartz movement. I forget the name of it offhand, but they had another one of those really high frequencies similar to the Omega Mega Quartz that was giving you like plus or minus 3 seconds a year. And that was without, multi-crystal thermal compensation, which is what it took Seiko to do years later. So, Citizen really did amazing things, but I think they just don't have as much of a presence outside of Japan. And since there's not a lot of people who read Japanese, you don't really get that same storytelling that you do with Seiko, which had the bigger international footprint.
It's always so interesting, because I've had to do some research onto Miyota movements. And so you look at the Miyota website and you're looking at what their specs are, and it's still it's a real solid Japanese language site, and it makes the outreach to an international audience a little bit more difficult from them. But man, the stuff is good, and we can't talk about quartz without talking about the Citizen 100, which is the most accurate quartz. And God, it's a beautiful watch. It is so pretty. It really is. Like, man, yeah.
Honestly,
I'd wear one of those. I'd rock that.
Honestly, these days, I think Citizen is doing a better job in quartz than Seiko across the board, not just at the really high end with the 0100, but their I think it's A0600 is their competitor to the 9F. It's solar powered, independently adjustable hour hand, perpetual calendar. They're spec to plus or minus 5 seconds a year, which they don't always do from what I've heard, but it's very close to a Grand Seiko 9F. They've got like 23 jewels. They're really ridiculous. Yeah, they're really working
absolutely ridiculous in terms of what it is that they're able to accomplish and where quartz has gone. So, Steve, let me ask you: do you have an opinion about HAQ versus high accuracy quartz versus non-high accuracy quartz, and how that comes across?
So, just for people who are not that familiar with it, the general consensus of HAQ, high accuracy quartz, is like between plus or minus 10 or plus or minus 20 seconds a year. One of the requirements, as far as people are concerned, for high accuracy quartz is thermal compensation. So just as an aside, the biggest enemy of accuracy in quartz is temperature changes. because as the temperature changes even minutely, that affects the way that the crystal vibrates, that does the regulation of the watch. So different companies have used different ways to measure temperature changes in the movement and adjust the watch's rate accordingly. So that's considered one of those critical things if you really want a high accuracy quartz movement. I think HAQ is a really cool thing. Your average quartz.
Geek out on me, Steve. Come on, geek out.
Your average quartz is plus or minus 15 seconds a month, which is way better than almost all automatic and hand wound movements out there.
Right.
And it's accurate for most people. But if you're really going to go for the accurate movement, you might as well go for as max accuracy as possible. Because it's also a more expensive movement, usually you get better case quality, better construction of the movement. You get extra features like a perpetual calendar sometimes, or solar charging, or jumping hour hands. It's just it's like the difference between buying a like a cheap Timex, like an old Timex, an old mechanical one, or an Omega manual wind.
Right.
They work on the same principles, but the level of quality between them is
the execution always matters. And when you start talking about the HAQ package, the case finishing, the design, all of that goes with it. But it's something that Mike and I have talked about a little bit before. It's like good design is good design. And it doesn't have to be expensive, but you do need to put some thought into it. You do have to put some consideration into it. And it seems that when you're dealing with high accuracy quartz, when you're dealing with that particular niche, that the halo effect that goes with that specific, level of accuracy reflects in the design more so than, say, your Happy Meal watch, or, your Alibaba cheapo, whatever. And those guys, they're putting in the effort, they're putting in the work, and you just end up with a beautiful package,
Yeah. Well, I think, an HAQ, a modern high accuracy quartz movement, probably costs the same as a really high end automatic.
Oh, easily.
Like your average Seiko or Miyota, or even a Solita, like SW200, you're looking at like $50, maybe $100 movements. When you're looking at a high accuracy quartz like a 9F or something, well, 9Fs can't get outside of Seiko, but if you look at like the high accuracy movements that ETA sells, they cost as much as the higher end SW200s or 2824s.
And these are they're all industrial movements too. I mean, there's not the level of hand finishing, and that comes from the manufacturers.
Yeah. So you're looking at a movement that costs a significant chunk of money. So the manufacturer is not going to put that in a low cost case. They're spending that much money, so you're getting a high end watch. So that's a nice thing about jumping to HAQ. You typically get a much higher level of quality in the whole watch overall. And since a lot of manufacturers kind of give quartz movements, short shrift as is, if you have the choice between high accuracy or not, you might as well, because you're probably getting better everything.
How many high accuracy choices do you have right now, would you say?
Oh,
not a lot. It's Seiko, Citizen, their highest end models. The Longines VHPs. I think Certina and Mito have a few. There's also a few other companies that use high accuracy versions of ETA's quartz movements. I think Venpin makes one. I think there's
what about
one or two others.
That Breitling, the
yes, the Avenger, not the Avenger, the Aerospace.
Yeah. So I mean, it's up there. It's up there, and you start talking about what those watches are. Like, man, they're nice. Mm-hmm. So talk to us, Steve, about some of the examples that you've got, because we're talking vintage quartz here, and I know you're the guy.
Yeah. So I have two examples of vintage quartz today.
So when we first started talking to Steve, it was out of the Bulova space, and then come to find out he's a Seiko guy. So it really changed gears. The dynamic of a lot of our conversations that we've had over the last, I'd say, month or so.
Yeah. So I don't want to distract too much, but I got into Bulova because my grandfather's watch, and they make great stuff. But for me, the challenge with vintage watches has always been maintaining them. And I've got a watchmaker that I've used for the past few years who's a Bulova trained watchmaker. So he knows Bulovas, he knows a lot of Swiss movements. but he doesn't really know anything about Japanese movements. And while I'm sure he could do it, getting access to the parts or the service manuals is tricky. So like everybody else, you spend enough time in the watch community and you fall in love with Seikos. They've made all sorts of cool stuff over the past 70, 80 years. So I wanted a Seiko, but I had no idea how I'd be able to get one serviced. So when I started looking into it, I realized, well, they made a bunch of quartz stuff and they were innovators in quartz. So let's take a look at that. And then I find that, especially in the mid 70s, the transition between your automatic and hand wound King Seikos and Grand Seikos into your quartz King and Grand quartzes was seamless. You're getting more or less the same watch for $200 when a comparable Grand Seiko might be.
When you look at what you're getting, something like this,
yeah,
you're getting so much watch for the money.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
from a finishing standpoint, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
Absolutely ridiculous,
sure.
because the finishing didn't change, not at all. Because the standard, like the design was still the same. It was the same design, the same everything. You know,
Yeah. So this case, this is actually the same case as the one that Mike's wearing.
Mhm.
This was pretty much identical to one used on early to mid 70s 56 series automatic King Seikos. It's almost identical. You probably have to mic them out to see any differences. So, you know, this I bought off of a seller on Instagram for like $200. A comparable King Seiko would be $500 or $600, and it's just as nice, just as well finished. If you were to hold this thing up in a book with text, the text is distortionless. You can read it clearly off the side of the watch. You know, you're getting all of that grammar of design quality in a much lower cost, and these are extremely accurate watches. I mean, both of these are still within like 10 seconds a month, which isn't bad for 40, 45-year-old watches.
For something that's that old. Yeah.
So I have two examples with me today. The one on this side is a blue 4823 8000. The 48 was basically the second generation of fully commercialized Seiko Quartz Movements. It's non-thermal compensated, or at least single quartz, no separate quartz for separate crystal for thermal compensation. This one's a day date. It's got a beautiful blue-gray dial, beautiful case. These movements are generally very durable, very reliable, very easy to maintain, and adjustable. I know the one that Mike's wearing was serviced before I bought it, but this one hasn't been serviced, and it keeps pretty much the same time, which is pretty impressive to me. The second one that I have is a King Quartz 9923 8060. You can't really see it, but this thing is impressive because it's about 9.5 millimeters thick overall. So the 99s came after the 48s. They were the third generation of Sua commercialized, mass production quartz, and they introduced thermal compensation to Seiko Quartz Movements. So there are a few different ways to do thermal compensation, but the way that Seiko used both factories to thermal compensate was to have two crystals. The first crystal is your standard timekeeping crystal. The second crystal was cut slightly differently to give you slightly different vibration performance. And then depending on the factory and the exact model of movement, the signals from the two quartzes were compared and then used to adjust the timekeeping of the watch as the temperature changed. Because obviously the performance of both crystals was plotted out, and you could calculate the difference. On the Suas, the main crystal was for timekeeping, and the secondary crystal was just for comparison purposes to adjust the second one. The Dynees actually had two crystals that were both used for timekeeping, and they were always averaged. So both of them gave you performance of between 5 and 20 seconds per year, depending on the level of specification. The earlier 48s and 38s, and then the Dyne equivalents were anywhere from 5 seconds to 20 seconds a month.
Let's just take a moment and just really absorb what he just said. And people want to hold their mainsprings in such high regards. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Now, I will say that, after 40 years, this thing does not keep 20 seconds a year. But, this comes down to another thing that companies learned as they got more into quartz. There's something referred to as crystal aging, where your crystal is put in a package, like a plastic container. and then over time, that package shifts and settles, and the way that the crystal vibrates over the years changes, just as the whole package kind of breaks down a little bit. So this watch was capable of 20 seconds a year when new, but after 40 years, it's nowhere near as accurate. But it is adjustable. So I know people who have this style of movement who've got them back into your 10, 15, 20 seconds a year just by playing with the screws, the adjustment
Isn't
screws.
that nuts? And it's, when you still get into it, you realize that this, regardless of the technology, there's still a level of adjustment, and there's still a place for a watchmaker who's competent. And if you can get that, you can find somebody who can service. You're golden.
So just educate me real quick. How do you adjust a quartz? Is it a screw? Does it just press on the crystal? Apply pressure to it?
You use your mind, man. You use your mind. You think it in. You hold it up. You put it out in the moonlight. You let it recharge just enough, and then crystal power, man.
So I don't know the exact electronics behind it, but I think it's like a variable resistor where you basically are adjusting a screw and it changes
See, that would make more sense.
Yeah, the power through the circuit.
No, man, it's in the moon. That's all I got. I'm sorry. That's it.
That was it. I thought there was more. Okay. But I mean, such a cool history, a cool history involved with how these things were developed, where they came from, where they started from. And
the amazing thing to me is this all happened in the span of 10 or 12 years.
Oh, yeah, very short time.
From like when the Beta 21 and the early Astrons were tested at Neuchâtel in like 67, 68, 69 to probably the early 80s when like the quartz race was more or less over. You went from 2 minutes a year accuracy to 5 seconds a year. It's incredible.
It's stupid compared to what it was and how they got to where they got, and the amount of it was just come on.
The unfortunate thing is, you look at like by the 80s, the race for accuracy was over. Pretty much everybody who cared was able to get that 10 seconds a year accuracy. And from there, the real change was thinness. Your highest end quartz movements in the 80s were all trying to be as thin as possible, make the watch as small as possible. That's something where quartz has like an unassailable advantage over mechanical and hand-wound movements. It's way easier to make a thin movement with the quartz than it was with an automatic. So the companies,
Piaget came along and made a 1.8 millimeter mechanical movement.
Yeah, which bends if you sneeze at it.
Right. I was gonna say you can't strap it on too tight, and it doesn't work in the cold. But still, all right. I'm gonna call it. So let's go with the last call here, gentlemen.
Well, so foot golf, that's a thing.
Foot golf.
What? How does that work?
Foot golf. It's an interesting combination between golf and soccer.
Do you change shoes in the middle? Do you have to put on your driver shoe and your putter shoe?
No, well, I wear Chuck Taylors on a regular basis. I can tell you that is not the proper shoe to play foot golf with, because the tip of your shoe, the toe, is very sharp and very rounded. And if I'm aiming in one direction, the ball tends to go far off in the other.
Okay, so stupid question. How big is the ball? Is it like a soccer ball or something like that?
It's a soccer ball.
Okay.
I forget.
That's not the question. The question is, how big is the hole?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you would ask me that. I forget what they said. Is it
as big as my head?
Hole? I don't know. It's a big hole. So you don't play the full length of the green, or you're the fairway rather. You're playing 3/4 of the length. So it gets a little confusing because the golf course is laid out for you to hit from the tee box, you putt on the green, and then you see the beginning of the next hole. So you're short, so you're having to find your way around, and it's like a little bit of a maze. And if you find the right hole, then you're good to go. Not a summer sport. There's a lot of running, a lot of movement involved, a lot of walking. You get very sweaty if you play this in the middle of a Florida afternoon, as I did. But it's fun. I mean, you go out there. My 14-year-old daughter and I had a blast. We played on a 9-hole course, and we're both looking forward to doing it again. But apparently, the guy at the starter shack was telling me that this is a serious thing. They have leagues, countries versus countries. I put up a couple pictures on my personal Instagram account and the hashtag, foot golf and that. And there was a lot of people that liked it that are involved with all kinds of foot golf craziness. So, but if you have a course near you that offers it, go give it a try at least once. You're going to have fun. There's a lot of laughing involved, a lot of making yourself feel stupid, but it's a great time. Well, see,
Yeah,
and,
I think
and
that
when I
sums things
first
up
heard
nicely.
about it, that's what I thought too.
Okay.
It makes me think of like ultimate frisbee, but backwards in some way, like that
And-
same level of absurdity.
Well,
But
kind of,
And see, now, and this is the
frisbee
thing,
golf, too.
right? I coached and played ultimate frisbee, and so I get that. And this is sort of like beyond it, even for me. And I have my own personal engraved ultimate frisbee discs. So,
Ooh.
well,
That's what, excuse me.
I know that of which I speak. Any last rant you got, Steve? Anything you got to get off your chest?
no, this has been a really good time. You guys are officially my first podcast.
So
I
you had said that you were excited to listen to what we had come up with, and so we should be known that this is our second recording of this episode. Joe and I did this on our own a couple days ago. We failed miserably at it, both
It
in
was
content
awful.
and audio, video. I mean, the whole thing was just horrible. So not only did you get to listen to it, you get to be a part of it, Steve. I think we picked the perfect person to be on here with us.
I agree.
Your knowledge of vintage Seikos just overwhelms me at this point. So
well,
if I ever go to buy a Quartz Seiko, or maybe, who knows, perhaps this one, we'll see. I'll definitely come to you for some advice.
I will gladly cut you guys a good deal. And if I decide to get rid of either of these, then I'll let you know.
There it is. We got an in vintage Seiko.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is such a rabbit hole. Oh my God. Because at least, see, I was thinking about this. This will be my last call. Vintage Seiko. You know what it is. You know what it's called. You can date it to the month that it was made. You can get parts. People have got and it is delineated. It's laid out. It's very Japanese. It's precise. And then there's Bulova.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what it is, and maybe it's not. And who knows? And it could be a mechanical watch with a quartz case back. It's fine. It's fine. Nobody knows. We're going to call it 14 different things because that's
well,
what's
look
in
at
print.
it this way. Bulova is not for the faint of heart. So when it comes to trying to figure out the history and what's what, and even when you have the holy grail of information, the line books, you still can't figure it out. So Seiko is for those that want to have the history and want to have the superiority in finishings and designs and movements, and
They want
just don't wanna
assurances
deal
in
with-
their life.
They don't want to deal with all the BS that is Bulova.
Bulova is for surprises.
Yeah, exactly.
Seiko is like a deep, dark rabbit hole to fall down, but it's nice because it gives you answers.
It does.
You know
Well,
what you're looking
see,
into.
You
Bulova-
know there's a cushion.
No, no.
There's a mattress at the bottom.
What did you see? Bulova is a deep, dark rabbit hole. Seiko has a nice little ladder going down.
That being said, though, Mike, that 4821 you have on your wrist is not cataloged. So that's something where I had to dig long and hard to find any information about that one. But the other two,
I did a little research when you sent it, and that's one thing that I have come across is some of these aren't cataloged. So
yeah. So there is a small corner of the Seiko universe that's deep, dark, and mysterious if you really want to go down it. But if not,
we'll give you a little corner.
Yeah.
So, Mike, how can we get in touch?
So this evening, Steve, Joe, and myself, we make up the Spring Bar Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Spring Bar Podcast. You can email us, thespringbarpodcast@gmail.com. On a personal level, I am 120 clicks, all spelled out, one word, 120 clicks. Steve, how can people get a hold of you?
My name is Steve. You can find me on Instagram at Bulovas_and_bolt_actions. I also have the same account on Watch You Seek. So if you want to harass me there, feel free to.
I am Watch Taylor Youth, TAYLORUPH, all one word on Instagram. And if you can't find that, search the hashtag Bulova666 and I will pop up quickly.
Yeah.
Also, you can hashtag us at the Spring Bar Podcast. We'd love to see any of your wrist shots, any of your drink shots, any of your wrist and drink shots. Please take the picture of the watch before you take a picture of the drink, because otherwise you're pouring stuff out and it's going to get wet over your lap. Also, we are looking for meetups. Any meetups that you've got going on, we would love to advertise for you. Let's get the watch fam together, because, you know, it's a lot more fun when you do this stuff together. And that's all I got.
All right, guys, this has been a lot of fun. Steve, glad to have you on here. Next time we feel like going down the Seiko rabbit hole, we definitely got to have you back. So
We have a
appreciate
Sherpa.
it. Yeah,
Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, you're
absolutely.
welcome. You're welcome. Thank you very much.
All right, gentlemen, until next time, cheers.
See ya.